Hi, and welcome to NEMCtv6. This is our focus program. I'm Joe Adair. I'll be your host today. And joining me is a very, very interesting gentleman. I'm so glad to have Steve TOMKOWIAK from the Fair Housing Center in the metropolitan Detroit area. So we've got a lot of questions we've got for you. So we're going to kind of first find out about a little bit of your background. How did you get into fair housing?
Right, first of all, thank you for inviting us. It's
You're welcome.
We always welcome the opportunity to help make people aware of fair housing. I got into fair housing. I taught in Detroit, and then I went to law school in the evening, and I came out. I clerked at federal court for 2 years. Then I worked at a big firm for a couple of years. So I really wanted to help people. So I went out on my own, and I met an attorney from a former EEOC attorney who did fair, and he introduced me to Mike Ocean at the Fair Housing Center. And then through that, I started doing fair housing cases, and it just kind of grew from there.
We had a really long and interesting conversation just before the shoot, and we kind of got a lot of information out of you. In fact, there's so much information that we can't possibly do it in just today's focus shoot. So we will be bringing you back, and we'll touch on and expand on some of the things that we're going to talk about today. But I wasn't aware really what the extent of fair housing is. So if you want to explain a little bit who benefits from fair housing, and at what point does someone call fair housing, and for what issues?
Yeah, fair housing it's defined by statute and constitution, and it's all based on protected class categories. By protected classes, there's race, color, religion, national origin, disability, familial status, sex, and then state law also has marital status is another one, and ages as a protected class category. But people that have been treated badly or adversely because of their protected class status, that's the main part. There's also affirmative requirements, which we'll get into a little bit as we talk. But those are the main ones. So who benefits from it? Of course, people who want to rent or buy homes, obtain loans, they benefit from fair housing. It helps protect them. It helps communities. Communities are inclusive of all people, of all backgrounds and ways of life. That's very helpful as well. It helps municipalities. The properties are maintained and taken care of. So it's a win-win-win situation. Ultimately, our effort is to make housing available for people who deserve and are qualified for housing. That helps housing providers make money by renting units. So there's not really a downside to it. And I try to press upon people to take that idea of fair housing. It's something. Kind of a win-win. It should be a win-win. Yeah. Correct. Fair housing is not dictating credit requirements necessarily. It's not dictating certain business practices. It's not looking at that. Housing providers, lenders, they can come up with their own business practices, but whatever business practices they do, they have to do it in a fair, non-discriminatory manner.
Right, and just to be clear, fair housing is not a lender. It's not a financial assistance. It's there for their protection if they apply for a mortgage and they get turned down for a suspicious reason or nothing that was of their fault or for a protected violation. Right. That's when they would get a hold of fair housing.
Yeah, that's when fair housing. So the main one on the federal level is the Fair Housing Act. At the state level, it's the Michigan Michigan at-large and Civil Rights Act and the Michigan Persons with Disabilities Civil Rights Act. Those are the main federal and state protections. There's also at the federal level, which a lot of people are aware of, the Age Discrimination Act, and that's something that applies too. That's more on places of public accommodation, so it's a little bit broader than simply housing. So that's the main thing. In order for the Fair Housing Act to apply, there has to be residential property. The state law is a little bit broader, covers all types of transactions.
So this is something that's available. You're an advocate for the individual.
Right, and we had we did have a good talk before we started, but there's the main regulatory agency, whatever is HUD. HUD has a component where they do housing. They may do Section 8, they may do affordable, housing aspect. HUD is very large. Within HUD, there's a separate branch, Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. That's the realm that we function under. So we're not with the FHA program per se. Certainly we'll get involved if there's discrimination in making
Right.
FHA loans. That's something different. But within Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, Congress has that unit, and they fund agencies like the Michigan Department of Civil Rights and HUD itself to do fair housing complaint enforcement. They also fund private fair housing organizations, which is what we are. The Michigan Department of Civil Rights and HUD are neutral. They do complaint investigation. If they find evidence to believe that there may have been a violation, then they can go into enforcement and have an administrative hearing. Our role is a little bit different. We're an advocacy organization. We want to be contacted by tenants, people seeking loans. We're even welcome to be contacted by housing providers, anyone needing information about fair housing. But what we do is we advise people as to what fair housing law is, what the requirements are, and if we're unable to work with a resolution with the housing provider or lender, then we can assist with enforcement proceedings and advise people, maybe this is a case that you should put with HUD or Michigan Department of Civil Rights, or maybe we have cooperating attorneys, a list of cooperating attorneys who will take cases on a contingency basis and commence those cases in state or federal court. We also do testing, fair housing testing as well. We send out testers, black-white testers or testers with disabilities or asking about a relative with a disability to get accurate information about what kind of housing services are being offered or provided or not provided. And they report back to us, and that is evidence that is admissible in court to corroborate or dispel an allegation of discrimination. Sometimes the testing evidence comes back and looks like, you may have suspected discrimination, but upon further investigation, it does not appear that way, and the case will end at that point.
Okay, and you said you're funded through HUD.
Primarily, we're funded through HUD.
So that makes no fee to the applicant.
Correct. No one who contacts our office for information about fair housing or makes a complaint, we've never charged. We've been in existence since about 1977, received over 8,000 complaints, and no one that's contacted our office during the complaint process has been charged. And again, we'll assist people as to what steps are. Of course, it's up to the individual what they decide to do. There's some victims that really don't want to pursue their claims, even though the evidence is very strong. They decide they just don't want to relive the experience. Mm-hmm. But in other situations, we make an effort to resolve it. And really, a lot of it is just getting people the information that they need about fair housing. I like to treat people as reasonable, and they'll do the right thing when they have the information.
That's good. And it's not necessarily just to help with getting things through your financing so there's no discrimination. You also handle existing rentals, landlord issues.
Correct. Yeah, probably the majority of our complaints are coming from rental situations, primarily people who are already in a unit. There may be just, allegations, but yes, we do. It could be discrimination claims, but we also have even more of our complaint intake, or I should say intake, are housing related issues. Many of them have to do with habitability. I know we mentioned before we came on, we have, I'm not going to name the city, but there was a city where someone was living, it was public housing, and she's been without heat for 2 years.
2 years.
It's just shocking. I think it's a boiler system. We suspect that the lines haven't been maintained and cleaned. But it's shocking. She has a disability. She also has been turned down with a support animal as well. So there's a bit of a fair housing component, but a habitability component. And so we can advise her under Michigan law, failure to provide an essential service like heat, hot water, electricity, that by Michigan law constitutes an unlawful lockout. It makes the property uninhabitable, and she's entitled to rent abatement. She's entitled to actual damages or a lesser statutory amount, but that needs to be addressed. Someone may look at that situation, well, why doesn't she just move? Well, that's an option too, if she can find something in this market. But the fact of the matter is that's something that should be provided. And so yes, who benefits from us? We work with building inspectors, code enforcement departments to make a complaint and to have it addressed. Again, we're in it to do what? To make sure that this individual has heat. So these are basic things. The evidence says that they told her, to run a space heater or use your oven. Oh, I should add, there's more facts on this. because she was using her oven in that, she's had headaches for a couple years because obviously she's dealing with a higher carbon monoxide level within her unit. So this is a serious
And
thing.
awful electric bills.
Awful electric bills. It may be, she may get assistance with her. I'm not sure if that's being charged to her or not, but that would be something that we
That'd
would
be
look
an
at.
instance that fair
Absolutely.
housing could help.
Right.
And-
So again, we're advocacy, we're assisting her.
Right.
Right? And it's not something, Michigan Department of Civil Rights and HUD, they're restricted to pure discrimination cases. But we have CDBG funding. We have people that, give voluntary contributions to our office to enable us to assist her free of charge. And a lot of people that we assist, majority are very low income.
And they just don't know who to contact. This poor woman, I suppose, is beside herself because she needs help, doesn't know how to get it, doesn't know where to get it. So it's
Right.
good that more people that we're telling more people about fair housing. I wasn't aware of the outreach that fair housing can do. So, helping people like that and make sure that they're in a safe and habitable environment is something that you can assure. And it doesn't necessarily mean fining the landlord or taking them to court. You try and work this all out reasonably first.
Absolutely. And ultimately, again, it's not our decision whether to proceed or take the landlord to court. It's really, the tenant, the person that's there, decision on that. But I lost my train of thought. But that's what we do. We're there to assist people, and I don't know. It could be simply, you don't assume. That's what I would say. The main thing, we don't assume.
Right.
It may be peculiar to her unit. It may be more widespread. We don't know. It may be unbelievable, but sometimes people don't report it, or they may have said it orally. Sometimes people don't have the wherewithal to put it in writing and to have it
Exactly.
addressed in that way. And again, who are we helping? I think the city would like to see that the units have heat. We're not opposed to the city. And so you mentioned, about with the funding in that, within Macomb County, we have partners. Macomb County gives us sub-CDBG funds. St. Clair Shores has done that for a number of years. Pontiac did at one point. Oakland County, Wayne County. And so that's what we're charged with doing, and we do that. So I tell people work in our office, this is the greatest job in the world because we get to come into our office every day and look for people to help. They
Right.
contact us and we help. If I didn't answer your question about people not being aware of us.
Well,
Yes.
okay, let's hold that thought. And we're going to be back in just a few minutes, so stay with us. We have more information to come. And welcome back to NEMCtv6's Focus program. I'm Joe Adair, and I'm glad you came back, and you're going to be glad as well. I think I have one of the most interesting guests that I've ever had on the show. And we are talking about something that's going to affect you or someone that you know and you don't even know it. So we're going to talk today, continue to talk with Steve TOMKOWIAK of the Fair Housing Center in Metropolitan Detroit in our Macomb area. So if you're in our viewing area, this is going to affect you as well. So Steve, we talked about a lot of things, and one of the things that we talked about was who benefits from fair housing and how it benefits them. But that doesn't really give you all the information about how it works and what to do about it or how to do things about it. So you do have training available.
Yes, we do quite a bit of training, a lot of training. We have information on our website, fairhousingdetroit.org, and you can look up and get information there. But the training we do is on a variety of fair housing topics, 20, 30 topics. And the training's offered to municipalities. When I say municipalities, it range from people that do code enforcement, housing, anything housing related, city attorneys and others. We train property managers, management companies, property management companies, apartment complexes, HUD finance projects, developments. We do individuals, for housing for individuals. So we read really a gamut of that. We've done webinars, conferences dealing with fair housing topics as well. Another way, the most common way for specific training is for people just to call the office, hit my extension 6, and I just say, just give me a couple of dates and we'll set it up. Have someone from our office that sets up training. So a couple times a week we go out and do training. And people can pick the topics they'd like training on, or we can pick current topics. I do talk to them to find out what kind of housing they have, whether it's single family rental homes or 55 and over housing or 62 and over housing, so make sure that the training is targeted to their needs. And then training for mortgage companies, lenders, spoken it before them as well. So, and it's the cost is not very much. So I would recommend at least every other year that people get fair housing training. You wouldn't think it doesn't get the media attention sometimes with fair housing, but it does change, and it's very, very important. I know on the break I mentioned that any kind of discrimination is wrong. If someone gets discriminated on the job, they lose their job or whatever, and they go home and
Get another job.
They're looking for another job. You get discriminated at home, you're on the street. You need to look for another place, whether it's sexual harassment or something along those lines. And the difficulty why we don't receive people, HUD did a couple surveys where they interviewed people, or they did a survey, how many people have felt they were discriminated against in housing, as opposed to how many felt they were discriminated against in employment. And what they found out is that the number of actual complaints that filed are much less, just a small fraction, because people are not aware that they can make the complaints. They're often not aware that they've been discriminated against. If you're on the job or you apply for a job and you get turned down, maybe somebody is there they can tell you who got hired and, hey, they weren't as qualified as you. So you have that basis to think, maybe I was discriminated. Maybe they didn't want to hire women or whatever. But when it comes to housing, if they don't rent to you, you don't know who they did rent to. Right. Or you don't know what their criteria was. So that's where it's a little bit tougher. Or if someone is being evicted, they said, well, you missed we have a case like this right now. You were late on your first 2 rental payments. So after a year, they're non-renewed. She also asked for a support animal. They didn't deny it, but then they gave her a late notice of non-renewal. But again, even in that situation, an average person is not going to know if other people had late payments and had their lease non-renewed. So right. That's where it can be proven if you know how to investigate it, and that's why people need to contact us. So, right. But the first question is what? People do need training. Anybody, just so that you have an awareness of what your rights are. To avoid these kind of violations, we're not here to have people do violations, we have people to do compliance with the law, but to make fair housing aware. People have some awareness of it and what organizations are out there to assist. Right,
and you're not there to slap the landlord in jail or, prosecute or anything.
No.
You just want to make it a safe and habitable situation.
There was one conversation with an attorney, and I'm so upset with them. I want to drive them out of business, but we're not going to use that attorney because that's not the point.
Right.
The goal is fair housing. It's not about a particular person. It may sound as who's a victim or who's a housing provider. The goal is fair housing. If fair housing has been violated, then it has to be corrected. That's the main thing. So it's not to drive people out of business, it's to get people in compliance. And a lot of the resolutions, a component of it is fair housing training. If people aren't doing it voluntarily and if they get caught with a violation, a real good approach is to let's do the training. And the training is not there to embarrass, humiliate anybody.
Right.
Don't even, in front of the staff, whatever, they'll never know there was a fair housing complaint filed and the training is required. I don't embarrass people. We just do the training. They don't need to know.
Right.
And I can work confidentially with management and staff and the owners to revise the policies to make sure there aren't future violations. That's a positive thing. That helps people who are seeking housing.
And it makes someone more comfortable once the issue is corrected, that they remain in that facility, that house, that rental, that
Yes.
property. So they don't feel like every time they walk out the back door, someone's going to throw a brick at them or something. So it's a very comfortable transition into a corrected situation.
Yeah, and people are often, if they don't do complaints or don't contact us, they're afraid that they're going to be retaliated
Exactly.
against and evicted. So there's a lot of fear
Right.
that goes with it, and that's unfortunate, especially now when housing is so scarce. People are real concerned about that. Of course, like in employment, it's unlawful to retaliate against someone because they've made a complaint for housing complaint.
Right.
But if you don't stand up, then the rights are meaningless. They're lost. I would hope no one would have that kind of concern. And the reality of it is, from the cases we've done, where there hasn't been a great deal of retaliation. I haven't seen it. The retaliation usually occurs before we get involved. Once
the
we get
fights are
involved and
already
we're
there.
aware, they tend to
Yeah.
kind of conform more to what the law requires.
Right.
But
Right.
again, it occurs before. I haven't seen many instances in which there was retaliation.
Right. And again, give the Fair Housing website a check out.
Fairhousingdetroit.org.
We're going to put it right on the screen as well.
And the phone number 313-579-FAIR, F-A-I-R.
Right. Because obviously there's got to be somebody that everybody knows that isn't being treated well and could use some assistance. And it may just take that nudge from a friend to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, and there are times where, we don't get the complaints. And for example, so we initiate our own investigations. We're looking at nursing homes, assisted living facilities to see if they're meeting American Sign Language requirements. That's a requirement, federal requirement that they have to meet. Another thing, we'll receive complaints, for example, for two key things are reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications. Under fair housing regulations, someone has a right at their own expense, unless it's federal finance. If it's a federal finance property, then the housing provider has to pay for it. But on most situations, for reasonable modification, whether it's a ramp or grab bars, that has to be permitted, but it's at the tenant's expense. But we had situations where, and it's been the law for 30 years, place out in Holly, they refused to allow a person to put grab bars. I guess they didn't like the damage to it, whatever. They said, you can use suction cups. Well, the man had a mobility impairment, he was elderly, and it was too risky for him to use the bathroom without the grab bars, so they would not permit the grab bars, period. Now, if they do permit it under the law, they are allowed to require that money be set aside by the tenant, and the housing provider, apartment complex, can take the money, put it into an interest-bearing account, and then that when they then move out of the unit, to have the bathroom restored without the grab bars. So it's a perfect requirement, so it should not have been turned down, and suction cups are not safe. But again, they just weren't aware of
the
the law.
options.
They didn't take advantage
Right.
of, and if it's a 1 or 2 unit property, that's one thing, but if it's a large apartment complex, so how many other people are being discouraged because of that requirement? So what happened is that family ended up going to another unit. They could not live there because they could not have a safe unit. So these are the kind of things that we work on. So it's had they gotten the training, this would not have been a violation.
Right.
There are times where your office even talks to somebody on the phone, resident manager on the phone, or and says, "Hey, this is what the fair housing requirements are. Please allow it," and they don't. And it just, you scratch your head. We're not trying to hurt anybody. We're trying to make it clear, but can't make anybody. All I can do is give the information.
Right. But were it not for you, that tenant wouldn't have any other resource. They wouldn't know where to go.
And that's the tip of the iceberg, right? If we get complaints here and there, but there can be many more violations that go undetected.
Exactly.
And when I talk about at the beginning about being an open housing, it makes units available for people of all backgrounds, disabilities. That's what fair housing does.
Right. Right. And that's where the training and just general information getting out to the public, I think, is beneficial, because everybody doesn't know. You may be able to help a friend tomorrow because you knew some of this information. So
Yeah, I emphasize, for example, with municipalities, if there's zoning board, they have to know that there's fair housing, reasonable accommodation, reasonable modification requirements that apply. I mentioned, a situation in Oak Park where the mother had a child with a severe developmental disability, but very impulsive. She would run out the door and run into the street. So she asked for permission to install a fence, and the city had no fence in the front yard. That was the ordinance requirement. And so that's a reasonable accommodation because it's necessary for the safety of the child. And so apply for a fence, and they were first reluctant to do it, then they permitted it. So what they then did is, rather than permit the fence to go all the way to the sidewalk, they cut it in 10 feet, almost hit a big tree. And I don't know why they did. I think it's more unsightly that way. But the fact of the matter is, and all these things can be discussed. If the family moves out or the daughter is no longer residing there, then the fence can be removed, and therefore the city can then have
stipulations can be put in.
Yeah, you can put stipulations in. So a lot of these
Right.
things can be worked out without any problem at all.
Right.
But it would be, again, it's a mistake for a municipality not to receive that kind of training.
Right.
And HUD has a whole policy statement on group homes and reasonable accommodation and zoning requirements. There's policy on that, which very plain English, question and answer format. And so what we do is simply inform people of what the requirements are. Mm-hmm. Not here to play, got you, and here's the test.
That's why I say we're not
if
there
we
to
did, we wouldn't be doing the
slap
training.
anybody's hands. We just want to make it.
There's other fair housing organizations that don't do as much training as
Right.
we do. I've done training
Right.
for MISTA in Lansing or Mount Morris, and then training in Grand Rapids. So,
Well, you are a wealth of information.
I will
That's
do
for sure.
training. So, or they could just call our office.
Exactly.
And I like it. My background was doing litigation and fighting all the time. I'm done with the fighting. I
Right.
want to just work together.
Let's make it work.
Yeah.
So we are going to bring you back.
Okay.
So if you have any questions or you have issues or maybe even concerns about a loved one or a neighbor, but give us a call. We are going to put our phone number, we're going to put Steve's phone number
Yes.
and the website onto the screen. Make sure you write that down if you think there's something you would need to know or someone who you think you can help. And we will have Steve come back. We'll schedule another focus program, and maybe we can just identify some of those topics and what some of the resolutions are to keep someone in a safe and comfortable environment. So glad to have you back. Looking forward to it.
And we will do it. We will make home visits. We'll go take pictures of the parking lot, and whatever needs and concerns there are, we're happy to do it. This is the work that we do.
They're very accommodating. Thank
Absolutely.
you for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you
you
for
being
having
here,
us
Steve.
again.
And thank you for watching. I'm Joe Adair. This is NEMCtv6 Focus Program.